just getting to put the music out there feels really.
The stage lights dimmed, and the first notes of Father echoed through the arena. Standing beneath the spotlight, Demi Lovato closed her eyes, holding back tears. This wasn't just another song. It was a confession, a goodbye, and a healing wound all at once. In that moment, thousands of fans listened in silence, unaware that the person behind the microphone was reliving a lifetime of longing for a man who had always been there and yet never really was. Demi Lovato's relationship with her father, Patrick, was filled with unanswered calls, broken promises, and an ache that fame couldn't soothe. He wasn't there to see her rise. He wasn't there when she fell. But this story isn't just about a girl and her absent father. It's about pain, forgiveness, and how even in the darkest corners of memory, light can still find a way in. Today, we look beyond the headlines into the heart of one of music's most resilient voices and the man whose silence shaped her sound.
Demetria Devone Lovato was born on August 20th, 1992 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a city that offered sun-soaked streets but little in the way of shelter from the emotional storms that would define her childhood. From an early age, Demi showed signs of rare talent. She could sing before she could form full sentences, and by the time most children were learning to read, she was already playing piano and performing on stage. But this wasn't a fairy tale beginning. Behind the precocious smile and perfect pitch was a young girl navigating a fractured family. Her parents had divorced when she was barely 2 years old. Her father, Patrick, vanished into the background, while her mother, Dianna, became both anchor and compass, raising Demi and her sisters largely on her own. Demi's breakthrough came not through luck, but relentless pursuit. She first appeared on Barney and Friends at the age of 10, a bright-eyed child surrounded by purple dinosaurs and forced cheer. But it was Disney Channel's Camp Rock that truly launched her into stardom. Alongside the Jonas Brothers, she became a household name overnight. Her voice, raw, emotional, and powerful, stood out even in an industry filled with polished pop acts. As her fame grew, so did the weight on her shoulders. Being a teen idol came with invisible chains, body scrutiny, online bullying, the impossible expectations of constant perfection. Demi wasn't just singing songs, she was battling internal wars that few could see. By the time she was in her late teens, Demi had already faced more than many adults: an eating disorder, self-harm, anxiety, and addiction. She entered rehab for the first time at 18. But even in her most vulnerable moments, she remained remarkably honest. In interviews, on stage, and in her lyrics, she stripped away the glossy facade and laid bare her truth. Songs like Skyscraper, Sober, and Anyone weren't just chart toppers, they were open wounds set to melody. Her fans didn't just listen, they related. Demi became a symbol not just of survival, but of what it means to live with scars and still sing. Yet for all her strength, one shadow remained: her father. The man who gave her a last name, who shared her love of music, but who had become a ghost long before his death. And that absence would echo loudly when the final goodbye came. To understand Demi Lovato's heart, one must look beyond the headlines and awards. One must go home, to the quiet chaos of a split family, to the silence of unanswered phone calls, and to the resilience of a single mother who became the unshakable foundation beneath a rising star. Her father, Patrick Lovato, was a man of many contradictions, a musician with dreams of artistic success, yet a man whose demons often sang louder than his own guitar. Born and raised in New Mexico with Spanish and Native American roots, Patrick worked as an engineer by day but kept music close to his soul. He wrote songs, sang with emotion, and hoped, perhaps quietly, that one day his children might inherit both his talent and his pain. But Patrick struggled with mental health, with addiction, and, most painfully, with showing up. After his divorce from Dianna in 1994, when Demi was just a toddler, he drifted away, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Over the years, he would reappear sporadically. A phone call here, a voicemail there, sometimes a birthday wish, but never long enough to mend the growing gap. To the public, he was a mystery. To Demi, he was an ache, an unresolved chord in her life's melody. "I wanted to love him so badly," she once said, "but he just couldn't be what I needed." On the other end of that broken family line stood Dianna de la Garza, a woman who once cheered beneath stadium lights as a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader, now learning to cheer for her daughters through the storms of real life. After the divorce, she took full custody of Demi and her older sister Dallas, later raising their half-sister Madison with her second husband. Dianna traded the glamour of modeling and performing for early mornings and quiet prayers. She became manager, mentor, protector. When Demi wanted voice lessons, Dianna found the money. When Demi needed comfort after school bullies mocked her weight, Dianna waited at home with open arms and warm soup. But even she carried her own shadows. Dianna later opened up about her struggles with depression and an eating disorder, wounds passed down like unwanted inheritance. It wasn't a perfect household, but it was a home of honesty, love, and constant trying. Demi remembers late nights when her mother would sit beside her on the bed, brushing her hair in silence. "You're enough," Dianna would whisper, "even if the world says otherwise." Their bond was forged not in ease, but in fire. It was Dianna who first drove her to auditions, sat backstage during early performances, and wiped tears after harsh rejections. She wasn't just a parent, she was the first believer. Still, Patrick's absence never truly disappeared. On some days, Demi would write him letters she never sent. On others, she'd scroll through old pictures, trying to remember the sound of his voice. In interviews, she vacillated between longing and frustration, forgiveness and finality. He was a father who gave her genes, but rarely guidance. Yet in that contradiction lies the emotional core of Demi's life, raised by a woman who gave everything, haunted by a man who gave nothing and everything all at once. Before his death, Patrick tried to reconnect. There were messages left unread, calls ignored. Demi wasn't ready, and maybe neither was he. But one day, he was simply gone.
It was June 2013 when the call came. Demi Lovato was in the middle of a promotional tour, smiling for cameras, giving interviews, hiding the exhaustion behind perfect makeup and polished answers. But on that day, the script went silent. Her father, Patrick Lovato, had died after a long private battle with cancer. No headlines had prepared the world. No alert had warned Demi's heart. There was no hospital bedside goodbye, no final conversation. He passed away alone in New Mexico. The details were sparse. The distance, both literal and emotional, had become permanent. For many, it was just a footnote, a small line in entertainment news. But for Demi, it was a rupture in a scar that had never truly healed. Patrick had been sick for years. Reports suggested he battled both physical illness and mental instability, but he never let his daughters see the worst of it. In fact, He rarely let them see anything at all. Demi once shared that she tried to reach out, that part of her hoped for reconciliation, but the past had built too many walls. Each attempt at connection dissolved into silence. Messages were missed. Apologies were left unspoken. When the news of his death arrived, Demi didn't react with tears, not at first. Instead, there was a strange stillness. Grief for her wasn't loud. It was a quiet room where all the questions she had ever wanted to ask now had no one to answer them. What hurt the most wasn't his death, it was the life he had chosen to live without her. In the months that followed, Demi didn't speak much publicly about her father. But behind the scenes, something shifted. She began writing again, not just pop songs, but deeply personal lyrics that explored the ache of absence. Then came Father. Released in 2015 as part of her Confident album, the song was a haunting, gospel-tinged ballad that stripped away every filter. Her voice cracked and soared, and the lyrics held no bitterness, only sorrow and truth. She sang, "I know you had to go, but I still wish you could have stayed." It was both a eulogy and a confession, a goodbye wrapped in melody. For fans, it was just another moving song, but for Demi, it was the funeral she never had. She later admitted in interviews, "It's hard when you have a complicated relationship with someone and you lose them. It's hard to write a song that says, 'I forgive you,' but I had to."
There was no red carpet, no flashing lights, no entourage of stylists or publicists, just a small, nondescript cemetery in New Mexico, a few close family members, and the quiet hum of desert wind moving through sunburned trees. Patrick Lovato's funeral took place away from the spotlight that had defined his daughter's life. He had long lived in the shadows, distant, elusive, and ultimately alone. When he passed, there were no press statements from the family, no photos of black-clad celebrities arriving in limousines. It was a farewell kept behind closed doors, where grief didn't need an audience. Demi didn't invite the cameras. She didn't release a public tribute or hold a memorial concert. Instead, she grieved privately, carrying the weight of loss in silence. Some speculated she didn't attend the funeral. Others said she came alone, hours before the service, leaving behind a folded piece of paper atop the casket. No one ever confirmed what was written inside, not even her closest confidants. But one thing was clear. Whatever words she couldn't speak to her father in life, she left behind in writing. There were no grand speeches, no rehearsed eulogies, just whispers in the wind, half-finished prayers, and the ache of a daughter trying to say goodbye to a man she never fully knew. Demi's team later confirmed she had set up a mental health treatment scholarship fund in his name called the Lovato Treatment Scholarship Program. It was her way of making sense of his pain and transforming absence into help for others. I believe he wanted to be a good person, but mental illness and addiction can make you disappear from the people who need you the most, she once said in a quiet interview. While the rest of the world continued spinning, new songs released, stages built, awards handed out, Demi was frozen in a memory of a man who was both the beginning and the unfinished sentence in her story. In the weeks after the funeral, she turned inward, canceled interviews, disappeared from social media. She wasn't mourning a father in the traditional sense. She was grieving the relationship they never had. And yet there was a kind of peace in that stillness. For the first time, the questions had stopped echoing. There were no more what-ifs, only acceptance. As the sun set on that quiet funeral, somewhere in her mind, a door closed. Not with anger, not even with sadness, but with the finality that only comes when the heart chooses to let go.
The loss of her father didn't shatter Demi Lovato. It revealed where the cracks had always been. For most people, grief begins with a presence suddenly gone. For Demi, it began with an absence that had always been there. Patrick Lovato was a ghost in her life long before he passed away. And when he died, the silence he left behind felt strangely familiar. But grief has a way of forcing change. It pushes the soul into dark corners, demanding answers, or at least a reckoning. After Patrick's death, Demi began to speak more openly about mental illness, not just his, but her own. She had long battled demons of addiction, disordered eating, and depression, but now she saw them through a new lens. Her father hadn't been cruel. He'd been lost. And in many ways, so had she. In 2013, the same year he died, she launched the Lovato Treatment Scholarship Program, covering treatment costs for those struggling with mental health and addiction. It was a bold move, not for show, but for healing, for others, and maybe for herself. Her music also shifted. Gone were the polished, radio-ready lyrics that masked pain with dance beats. In their place were raw ballads like Father, Sober, Anyone, songs that sounded more like confessions than performances. Each word held the weight of unspoken goodbyes, each note a message to someone who would never hear it. She told interviewers that singing helped her survive, that sharing her story helped others survive. She wasn't trying to be perfect anymore, just honest. And in doing so, she became something more powerful than a pop star. She became a voice for those who felt voiceless. Still, the impact lingered in therapy sessions, on-stage breakdowns, in the eyes that sometimes looked too tired for someone so young. The shadow of her father didn't vanish, it softened. She said, once, "I forgive him because holding on to anger doesn't bring peace, and because I think he loved me the best way he knew how." In choosing forgiveness, Demi didn't erase the past, she transformed it. And in doing so, she reclaimed her narrative, not as a victim of abandonment, but as the author of her own healing.
In a world where fame often hides the fractures beneath the surface, Demi Lovato chose to reveal hers, fearlessly, vulnerably, and without apology. Her journey wasn't about becoming a superstar. It was about surviving the weight of memory, of growing up with a mother who gave everything, and a father who gave too little, too late. Yet in the end, she found her own voice, not just in music, but in forgiveness. Because sometimes the loudest echoes in our lives come from people who said nothing at all. Demi didn't let that silence define her. She sang through it. She healed through it. And in doing so, she reminded us that not all pain is visible, but all pain deserves a voice. The stage remains her sanctuary, and each note she belts is a conversation with her past, unfinished maybe, but no longer unanswered. And you? Have you ever found the strength to forgive someone who was never truly there? If Demi's story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Hollywood Bloodline, where every spotlight reveals a deeper story behind the stars.